Welcome viewers to Hotline with Aunt Vicky once again on iTV and iRadioTT.com. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining with us. Today we have a very interesting discussion ahead with Dr. Mohamed Keshavjee. He is a specialist he's an author, have written many books. He is a relative of the late Mahatma Gandhi. He has received many awards. But I ask you to think about what does it take to raise a child? You know the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. When you are someone who is a migrant, what do you look for in that person? Why is it important to form a sense of compassion and community for these migrants? If you ask migrants, any migrant, what they miss most, they will tell you family. And family is important. Dr. Keshavjee, welcome to Hotline and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Annie. If you don't mind my calling you Annie.
I don't mind.
And please feel free if you want to call me Mohamed. So if you drop the Mr., I won't mind. You are a little soft, so maybe you can repeat your question a little louder so that I can sort of then focus clearly on your question in a much better way. So might you be just a little louder and repeat your question?
I said, welcome to Hotline with Aunt Vicky on ITV, and how have your visit to Trinidad and Tobago been so far?
Well, I've been here about 4 or 5 days and I feel a total thrilling. I mean, in the shortest period of time, I've got to know so much of Trinidad. Now, let me tell you why I say that. This program is a little late for the simple reason I was caught in a flood.
Yeah.
So now you know what type of monsoonal rains you have there. You don't call them monsoon rains, you call them just a wet season. So there was I caught in a particular flood, and then I got somebody near a rocky shop to help us. This chap was there, said park the car outside, and I saw the rocky shop in the street. A few days ago, I have a friend who has a gravel delivery truck, so he took me all the way to deliver gravel in a hardware store. I took a bus to Tuna, and I had Indian food in a Tuna restaurant. So, and then yesterday I went beyond Pinau to an old settlement where I met an old man whose father came as a cane cutter. So it's a very short period of time in which I've had the opportunity to see a fair amount of Trini life. And I thought it so interesting. Well, a few days ago, I spoke at the Mahatma Gandhi Cultural Center on Mahatma Gandhi's life and the intersections of Trinidadian thinkers in the whole movement that led to the political emancipation of Africa. So it is a very interesting few days of what I call steep learning.
Dr. Mohamed, you were born in South Africa, I understand, and now you live in England. Tell us about your journey. What caused you to migrate to England?
Well, I am like many of the people of Trinidad. My grandfather left India in 1890s. Actually, my grandfather arrived in South Africa in 1901. But my grandfather's two brothers came to South Africa in 1894. So they came from India to South Africa to better their position. But they didn't come as indentured laborers. They came as what is known in South Africa as passenger Indians. That means they followed the indentured laborers. But they didn't come as indentured laborers because they paid for their own passage. Now, South Africa at the time was a very racist society, and they didn't know about it. So they came and they settled in the country, and my grandfather's two brothers started selling vegetables in the street. But slowly, from the very vegetable-oriented basis, they got into little shops and they started business. And over a period of time, my family, like many other Indians who came at that time, got into little businesses, little shops. And from the little shops, they started bigger shops and wholesale trading companies. So we lived in South Africa. South Africa was a very racist society. Because of the color of our skin, we couldn't work. There was apartheid, what eventually developed to be apartheid. And you may remember that in 1960, Nelson Mandela was put into prison. He had to go to jail for 28 years. And many Indians were involved in the freedom struggle of South Africa with the black people. But in 1962, my parents took us away from South Africa to go to Kenya, because Kenya was becoming independent in 1963, maybe 1 year or 2 years after Trinidad got its independence, for example. So we left apartheid South Africa to go to independent Kenya, which in 1962 was led by a man who had come out of jail a year earlier called Jomo Kenyatta. And Jomo Kenyatta was a friend of a Trinidadian called George Padmore in England when he was a student there in 1945. But Jomo Kenyatta followed the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, because when the country was becoming independent, people thought that there would be a lot of trouble, there would be racial conflict, there would be fights. And Kenyatta said, look, let us forgive the past. We can't forget the past, but let us forgive the past. So 1962, Kenya was a new cosmopolitan, multiracial society that was being built. And my parents wanted us to get good education. And there was a good multiracial school called the Aga Khan School. The Aga Khan is a great visionary leader who decided to have multiracial institutions in Kenya at the end of the colonial period. And interestingly enough, one of my teachers in that school was from Trinidad. My biology teacher was a chap called Noor Ahmed Hussein. And I only found out yesterday that he was from Karani, and I met his family. So Trinidad has been part of my psyche now for 60 years. But I didn't know that I would meet some of the relatives of a teacher who had come from Trinidad 60 years ago, because he married an Indian doctor called Dr. Shamim from Kenya. So Trinidad was a bit of my understanding, but my journey was our family's journey has been from India to Africa and South Africa, which had no space for us. We could not live there because of the terrible racist system that we were living under called apartheid, which Nelson Mandela ended in 1994.
You have written a book on apartheid.
That is true. My book is called Into That Heaven of Freedom. And interestingly enough, I have a copy here, which I hope to give to the library. But let me see if I can keep the screen to remain steady, because it's keeping on falling. Just give me 1 minute, please.
Dr. Mohamed is known for resolving, being a mediator in family conflicts. In fact, he is a popular dispute resolution specialist. You know the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. This is one of Dr. Mohamed's firm belief. In fact, he has been doing conflict resolution for quite a while. He's currently writing a book. He is writing in another book spontaneously uh, on the history of his travel. No, his main field is mediation of family conflicts and family-related business conflicts.
So I'm ready here, and
Welcome
here is
back.
my book. I can show you the copy of my book. It is called Into the Heaven of Freedom. And you see two little girls there. The smaller girl is my mother, and the larger girl is her sister.
Okay.
And the road over there that you see is where Mahatma Gandhi used to come in 1914 to get a ride to go to meet the members of the South African government when he was negotiating about the future of the Indian community in South Africa in his great struggle for freedom. So this book here has got a foreword by an Indian man called Ahmed Kathrada. Kathrada was in prison for 26 years with Nelson Mandela. When Nelson Mandela went to prison, Kathrada was one of the men who was his right-hand friend with other people who spent about 25, 30 years in jail. So this is the book, which is called An Indian Family's Journey Through Apartheid South Africa. So that was my second book that I wrote. My first book was on conflict resolution and mediation. My second book was on my family's memoir. My third book here is a book of short stories called Diasporic Distractions. And I will mention that a little later if we have a moment to speak about.
But let's stick with Mahatma Gandhi. What actually brought Mahatma Gandhi to South Africa? Will you expand on that?
Yes, because what happened in 1893, there were two Indian businessmen in South Africa. One was in Durban and one was in Pretoria. These are two cities of South Africa. The man in Durban was called Dada Abdullah Javeri. He was from India. He was from Gujarat. He was a businessman, a very rich businessman. And he had a conflict with his cousin called Seth Haji Khan Mohamed. Khan Mohamed was a businessman in Pretoria. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was not yet a Mahatma. He was a lawyer. He was not in South Africa, he was in India. Abdullah sued his cousin. He sued his cousin for 40,000 pounds. Can you imagine now how big businessmen they were about 150 years ago? Now, when they had this conflict and dispute in court, Abdullah wrote to his office in India, in a place called Porbandar. Abdullah was a Muslim Mammon trader. Mammons are a group of Muslims who are business people. Abdullah wrote to his office in India, said, we have this dispute in a court of law, and we have to deal with white British or white Dutch lawyers. Can you try and find somebody in India who could come here as an interpreter, who could help us to talk to our lawyers? So Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi had just come back from England a year or two earlier, and he was not very successful as a lawyer. Gandhi was out of a job at that time. So Gandhi's brother wrote back to Abdullah's office in Porbandar. He said, I have a brother called Mohandas, and he is ready to go to South Africa. And so, when Gandhi's elder brother spoke to him, his brother said, yes, I'll go to South Africa for 1 year. I'm prepared to go. So they said, how much would you charge? And Gandhi said, 105 guineas, because he was using terminology that is British. And so, in the second week of May 1893, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi came by ship from India to South Africa, and he agreed to go and help Abdullah to communicate with these lawyers in Pretoria. Now, when Abdullah put Gandhi on the train to go to Pretoria, Gandhi bought a first-class train ticket, and he entered the station at Pietermaritzburg, which is in Natal, to go to Pretoria. The policemen of the railways got in the train and they picked him out. They said, "Why are you sitting in the first class?" And they used the negative word of C. I don't want to repeat the word, but they say, "Hey, you, C, what are you doing on the train?" He said, "I'm a lawyer. I've got a first class ticket. You get my ticket."
Mm.
They took the ticket and said, "You can't sit here. Get out." So he said, "I'm a lawyer." They said, "What do you mean you're a lawyer? Lawyer from where? You see, they're not lawyers in this country." So he took him and pushed him out of the station, threw him onto the platform in the middle of the night. It was about midnight. So Gandhi was dressed very beautifully with his British type of clothes, pinstripe, beautifully dressed, briefcase. They threw him, they took his bags, they took the bags out, and they kicked him out. Now, Gandhi had not yet reached Pretoria. Pretoria is still another maybe 8 or 10 hours on the train. But at certain parts, the railways did not have a direct line. You had to get on the stagecoach. So Gandhi got onto the stagecoach at a place called Charlestown. And the coach driver beat him up again. He said, "Go and sit at the back." And Gandhi said, "I don't want to sit at the back." He said, "You have to sit there, you see. You are a C." And Gandhi said, "No, I've got a ticket. I want to sit where I want to sit." So they beat him up again. So on this one journey from Durban to Pretoria, Gandhi was beaten up about 2 or 3 times. Finally, he ended up in Pretoria, the city where I was born. He couldn't get a place to stay for the night. But there was a station, there was a hotel near the Pretoria station where there was an African American who was working there. And he told the boss, who was an American, who owned the hotel, to say, "Can this man stay here? But he will not eat in the room." He said, "Yes, you can stay there, but don't have your breakfast with all the others, because we don't allow non-whites to be in white hotels." So then Gandhi stayed at the station hotel. Very soon thereafter, he met some of the Indian traders. And the first political speech Gandhi ever gave in his life was at the house of a chap called Mohamed Haji Yusuf, M.H. Yusuf. And this family gave him refuge for a few days. And Gandhi started his political career in South Africa. Because when he was thrown on the platform in the middle of the night with his suitcase thrown at him, he had a choice. He said, "Do I remain in South Africa or do I go back to India?" He thought about it and he said, "No, I am going to stay in this country. I'm going to fight for what I feel is my right." And so, having come for 1 year to South Africa, Gandhi ended up staying for 21 years. So that is destiny. Exactly like what happened to Martin Luther King and Rosa Woods years later happened to
It was
Gandhi.
destiny. Dr. Mohamed, we have to go to a short commercial break, and when we come back, we will continue this very interesting discussion on Gandhi. And when we come back, also, I would like you to share with our viewers, you have been present in Kenya when it gained its independence. Tell us what it was like to be a part of this wind of change. We'll be right back, viewers. Investigative journalism builds communities. Welcome to Hotline with Anduki on ITV every Monday live at 1 to 2 p.m. Challenges facing the nation. The economic outlook when wages are not rising as high as food prices. Will we be making a softer economic landing? Some experts are cautiously optimistic now. Health, job security, education, social imbalance, and the security of our nation all comes to mind. Experience all of this and more just ahead on Hotline with Anduki on IETV. Welcome back, viewers, to Hotline with Anduki with Dr. Keshavjee, Mohamed. And we are discussing at the moment Gandhi and the journey to South Africa. Dr. Mohamed, before we went on the break, I asked you what it was like to be a part of this wind of change in Kenya.
Between what was the life in Kenya compared to what it was in South Africa? Is that your question?
Yes, that is my question. When they gained independence.
Well, I came to Kenya in 1962 from South Africa. Myself, and I have 11 brothers and sisters. My father and mother brought us all from out of South Africa into Kenya. Kenya is about 2,000 miles or 3,000 miles in the north of South Africa, to the north of South Africa. Now, I came in 1962. 1962 was a very important year in South Africa because it was very close to the time that Nelson Mandela was going into prison and Jomo Kenyatta was coming out of prison. So we were going from one country where one person was going to be going into prison. He was going to become the president 30 years later. And we were coming into a country when a man was already in prison for 9 years, was coming out to become the president of the country. So Kenya was very exciting. Everybody was looking for independence. There was hope. There was excitement. There was fear of what was going to happen. There was uncertainty. There was this new school I was going to. First time in my life I was going to a school with a library. I went to a school in South Africa that didn't have a library. We had no proper scientific laboratory. We did not have any swimming pool. We did not have any green grass. We were in little boxes studying. For the first time in my life, I was going to a beautiful school with teachers from Britain who taught at top schools in the in Britain. There was teachers from India, bright teachers from India. As I told you, there was a teacher from Trinidad. So life in Kenya at the time was filled with fun for a young man. I was 17. I had a sister who was 15. I had a sister who was 13. I had a brother who was 11. I had another brother who was 6. I had a sister who was 4 years old. And I had brothers and sisters above me who were 2-3 years older than me. So we were a big family, an Indian family, full of excitement, full of life. And we were beginning to see a new horizon of hope. So Kenya was very interesting at the time.
Dr. Mohamed, yesterday you mentioned you made a trip down to Penal in South Trinidad and several other places you were fortunate to visit in the 4 or 5 days you have been here. What are your views or how do you view ex-planter colonies? What country does Trinidad or what can it be compared to?
You know, Trinidad is for me a very fascinating experience. In a very short period of time, I began to see a small island state. You know, it's something like Mauritius. It's something like Singapore. What I found exciting is that the Indian community in Trinidad is still very much close to planting. I find a very strong planting culture because I went to the home of a man whose son I met, who was a professor here at the University of West Indies. And the old man I met Raj Logan, was talking about his life. This is where people grew up as indentured laborers. When they came here, they planted food. And this man planted his own mangoes. When I was leaving, he gave me 2 mangoes. He gave me a big tumbler of fresh juice, papaya juice, orange juice, and apple juice with no sugar. And so he was very close to the ground in terms of his vision. Now, the Indians in East Africa were more urban people. What I find in Trinidad, the Indians have a more rural background, a rural culture. So that was very interesting to see. But also I find it very exciting to see the entrepreneurial spirit among the Indian people. I see little shops there, I see roti, I see chana in restaurants, in hairdressers, but I also see Afro-Trinidadian endeavors around. So for me, that juxtaposition of Africa and India in one little island state is a very interesting phenomenon for me. And I'm beginning to see, today I was stuck in a flood. Yesterday, torrential rains. And I wrote to my friend in Malaysia. I said, hey, this could be Kuala Lumpur. You have fresh vegetation and there's rains. There's tremendous rain, lush rains. So today I went to Port of Spain, going past Port of Spain to an area that's called Marapeg or something, where you have the arboretum, you have the shaganas, you pick type of area. I saw the lush vegetation. I've never seen such beautiful vegetation in too many places. So I think Trinidad has a lot of that exciting type of environmental factors which make it a very lovely country. Of course, any country would have the difficulties like all countries in the world have. So I'm not coming here as a tourist and say this is Shangri-La, but I need to see things that I have not been able to see, how people try and make life together.
You have won the prestigious 2016 Gandhi, King and Aikida Peace Award for your work in mediation. Tell us how do you feel about that and what is mediation?
Okay, mediation is a process by which we resolve conflict outside the context of the law, but within the law. So let me give you an idea. When two people have a dispute, traditionally our attitude is, I go take you to my lawyer. My lawyer going to lick you, going to fix you up.
I'll take you to court.
So I'm using a bit of Trinidadian lingo that we're going to fix you up, we're going to sort you out. No, that is the traditional culture in every country. That if you have a problem, you go and find a solution to lawyers. So when lawyers try and sort a problem out, it is the judge that decides, and you can have one winner and one loser. You can't have both party win, but both party eventually lose because the winner wins all, the loser can file bankruptcy and say, I'm not going to pay you. And you pay the lawyer a lot of money. I am a lawyer myself. I don't hate the law. But I say that there is another way to resolve your problem outside the context of the law. That is known as alternative dispute resolution. And mediation is a process in that whole concept that says that you do not go to your lawyer, but you go to a mediator, and the mediator doesn't decide. The mediator helps you to decide your problem together, to find a solution where you don't have one winner and one loser, but you have both people win, but they have to compromise a bit. So one person gives a little more, and the other one asks a little less. But eventually, you come across a resolution which the court will respect, because the court hasn't got time. The court is very expensive. And lawyers sometimes help parties to mediate because they say, look, why are you fighting for something that you can resolve outside the context of the law? So mediation now is becoming a more popular form of dispute resolution. And in the context of family disputes, like divorce, for example, they have found through research that when the husband and wife try and resolve the problem, then it's also good for the family and the children. Because when you have a divorce and the husband and wife fight tooth and nail in a court of law,
In
saying,
divorce, there is no winner, Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed, unfortunately, we have to take a short break at the moment. And when we come back, we will continue this discussion on alternative dispute resolution and why anger is an emotion. We'll be right back, viewers.
no problem.
Investigative journalism builds communities. Welcome to Hotline with Duki on ITV every Monday live at 1 to 2 p.m. Challenges facing the nation. The economic outlook when wages are not rising as high as food prices. Will we be making a softer economic landing? Some experts are cautiously optimistic now. Health, job security, education, social imbalance, and the security of our nation all comes to mind. Experience all of this and more just ahead on Hotline with Duki on ITV.
Okay, am I right? Okay, let me get this stand properly because okay, maybe that's better. Yeah, is it okay? Okay, lovely. Let's start again.
Welcome back, viewers, to Hotline with Duki on ITV and iRadioTT.com. Dr. Mohammed, welcome back. Sorry for the little break there. Before we went on the break, we were talking about dispute resolution and what is the best way to resolve family conflicts. You know, anger is an emotion. You may need to avoid certain people and certain circumstances to control your anger. Here's where anger management comes in. I suppose this is your area of specialty. Could you expand on that for us?
Well, and the problem is when people have a dispute, there is a lot of anger. There's a lot of pain. If you have two people who have been married for 30 years and then they have a divorce, then there's going to be a lot of anger. It's normal. Either the man is hurt or the woman is hurt. Or if it's a business deal, one partner feels the other partner in the business has done them down. Or if it's a family dispute, one brother may say the other brother robbed him. Or if it's two neighbors, they have a problem, one person will say, you did me wrong and I did you wrong. So in any conflict, in any dispute, anywhere in the world, when you start off, the anger is at a very high level. The trust is at a very low level. The mediator should try and increase the trust and reduce the pain. So it can't be just an ordinary technical exercise. The mediator has to be emotionally intelligent to understand that there are certain emotional difficulties, psychological difficulties. When you have a family dispute, when you have a divorce, there will be matrimonial conflict. The man is going to blame the woman is going to blame the man. The children are going to be caught in between. One or two children may say, Mommy is right, others may say, Daddy is right. So the mediator has to use techniques in order to reduce that pain. So the mediator has to change the terminology of the discourse. So the husband may tell the wife, you did that wrong. You are a bee. You are that. You are this. You didn't look after the children. You didn't feed the children. You were going out. Children were going without food. And the wife would say, no, you didn't do this, you were that. Now the mediator positively reframes the discourse. When he summarizes, he may say something like this. So I gather that when you have a dispute, both of you are concerned that the children, your children, should be in a good position. Now, none of the parties are going to say that's not true. They'll not. They'll say yes. So the mediator will say, well, is this what happens every time you discuss issues? Do you end up in an argument? Because if that's the way you end up in an argument, then we must do this thing slightly differently. So then the mediator will say, well, look, let's have some rules. We agree that when one party speaks, the other party listens. When the other party speaks, this person listens. Now, obviously, there's going to be anger, but if we feel that there's a moment in our discussion when the anger is very high, we're going to we're going to stop for a moment, and we're going to have a cup of tea. We're going to have a cup of chai. Let's break for a cup of chai. So the mediator is an intelligent man who lessens the pain through the way he or she reframes the questions, which doesn't happen in a court of law. In a court of law, the lawyer is going to say, your husband says you are this, you did this, you did that. Is it true or not? Because this is what we believe you did. A mediator can't use that language. A mediator is going to use the language of greater diplomacy, less adversariality, and more inclusiveness. So mediation now is becoming a process of dispute resolution that's beginning to be accepted in over 190 countries of the world. Every country is beginning to see this as a possibility also side by side with law.
Look, during the recent COVID lockdown, there were predictions that there would be an increase in family disputes because day after day, you have people who disagree with each other and they are forced to live in the same space day and night. And despite all of this, from your experience, have you come across any situation like this?
Situation like what? And
like during the COVID lockdown where families had disputes and they were forced to live in the same space?
That's a very interesting question because during COVID time, more people entered into online dispute resolution. That's number one. Number two, during COVID time, people had no choice. They had to live together. Now, there is a critique that says that during COVID time, there may have been a greater element of abuse.
Yes.
And female abuse is a very important factor. Because there is an argument that says that does mediation give women the protection of the law? There is a critique that says mediation can be detrimental to women. But don't forget, mediation has one principle, that if the mediator senses that there is abuse, domestic abuse or abuse of a kind, then the mediator is obliged to stop the dispute resolution process and report this to the police. But the mediator must be smart enough to notice that there is a genuine abuse, not that one party is using the excuse of abuse to stop the mediation process. Now, during COVID lockdown, a lot of mediation did take place. That is true. And an element of harm, or not harm, but concern may have been shown among some women, but also some men. It's not always the woman who is a victim of abuse.
Of course,
in some cultures, men suffer as well.
And
so I think mediation has to be fair. Mediation has to be fair. It has to be balanced.
It has to be balanced. Dr. Mohamed, have you found situations where, despite the abuse, that there's a part of you that don't want to leave? There are marriages like this that despite its abuse, they don't want to leave. They don't want to break up.
Well, there are all sorts of situations, and there are situations in certain cultures where a woman doesn't have to speak about the abuse because it will bring shame. This is not only among Indian cultures. It is among female cultures as well in many societies. So I think that there are situations where the mediator herself or himself will see that the abuse is at such a level that mediation ain't going to work. In which case, the mediator may bring the parties together and say that, look, we think law is the only place where we will get justice or fairness, and the mediator does that. Now, some cases, the mediator has to be careful that if the mediation takes process without sufficient protection for one of the spouses, then mediation sometimes can go wrong and endanger the other person. But mediation, it has been shown through research, is a better alternative to litigation. But anybody is mediator cannot just jump in and says, this is the only way you have to go. Because in some societies, people are afraid that because of patriarchy or misogyny or a strong cultural bias, women may be forced into going into mediation when they don't want to go there. But research has seen that mediation by its very nature as a process is not anti-women. It is in a way protective of the women. But then that is the process where good mediation should be professional mediation. The professional mediation can be superimposed on traditional systems. Among Indians, you have the panchayat system. When the Indians came to Trinidad 150 years ago, people came from those societies where some elder people would help to bring about the rectification, reconciliation. Indian culture is one where you say, well, look, let's talk to the elders. In some cases, I don't know if that happens in Trinidad, but pandits would be able to help. I know in my research, the imams of the mosque were able to help.
A long time ago that was present. I think it's societal pressure that have decreased.
Yes. Yes, you are right. And in some cultures, the priest would play that role. So many Indians in this part of the world were part of the Presbyterian Church. I'm sure the church played a role at one time. There are many Muslims here. Among the Muslims, I'm sure the imams, but also their families. There would be respected elders who played a part. I know that in Hinduism, you would have the panchayat system. The people would go to the older people. So that is what we call traditional dispute resolution processes. The challenge today is that the new generation would have a different idea of their rights, their duties, their liabilities, their position in society. And I think the greatest thing that I have done my research on is when you combine the two systems to work together within the framework of the law of the country. Because the law of the country is the final protector of your rights. But the law of the country also respects your right, your ability to go and use your own systems as an ethical framework within which your disputes can be resolved. So priests play their role, pandits play their role, imams play their role, people may draw from the principles of the Gita, people may draw from the principles of the Bible, but it must be fair. You cannot impose mediation on anybody by threatening them or making them feel guilty. And to me, that won't work.
Love should not hurt. Would you agree?
Sorry?
I said love should not hurt.
Lots of?
Love should not hurt.
Lawyers, you mean?
Love.
I'm afraid I don't understand the word because I'm not clear.
We'll move on to the other question. We have a family conflicts with properties and so on. You mentioned that earlier. Why is it traditionally, particularly in East Indian families, from your own opinion, why do you think They feel that their property or their belongings should go to the eldest son. That is still existent even today.
Well, interesting. Property going to the eldest son is a British system. It's a British legal system. It was called primogeniture. That is why some people went out of the country to other countries, because that was what the British imposed in India. It's a British common law system. Now, when you go to some of these countries, like the Indians went to, they went to South Africa, which was British common law and Roman Dutch law. They went to Singapore and Malaysia. There was no Singapore in those days, but the Malaysian system is British common law. India was British common law. So, in those systems, Kenya was British common law, East Africa was British common law, Sudan was British common law. In those systems, British common law applied, and in many cases, British statutory law applied. And even in a country like Kenya, right after the time of 1960s, the Indian Law of Property Act applied, what is applied in India. So, land holding in places like Guyana, places like Trinidad, places like the Caribbean islands, in my understanding, would have been very much defined by the British common law system that applied at the time. And so people may say, when you're dealing with land, it is much more legal than being possible by mediation. And sometimes people will say, I want to go by the law because the law is more certain. Mediation may not give them exactly what they want, but mediation can give them that. The parties agree to themselves. They can go to a court of law and say, we want to register our agreement, and we want to put in the agreement that we are happy with this process, and we want the law to help us to manage the process.
You know, Dr. Mohamed, we often hear this statement that it takes a village to raise a child. Do you find that is still applicable today?
That the stage is the...
It takes a village to raise a child.
I'm sorry, my hearing is a little soft. The state is...
I said, my question is, we often say in Trinidad, it takes a village to raise a child.
Ah, lovely. It's
Yes.
village to raising a child.
Yes. How do you
Well,
feel
I
about
put
that?
it the other way. When you talk about the village in which the child grows up, my understanding is that it takes a village to bring up a child. Whether the state is part of the village is a question we need to ask. Because I would say the community or the communities is the village in which to bring up a child. That means a child grows up with various understandings of each place in a family, each place in a community, and the place of the community in communities that make up the nation state. So while the state can protect the child's rights, which it should do, I always say, as far as the child is concerned, utilize the principles of the state laws, but ensure that the child grows up in the context of the values that a community teaches them. So you nurture the child with the values of its own communities, respective traditions, but the state becomes what I would call the overarching grandparents of the child. The state makes sure that there's no child abuse. The state makes sure that the child doesn't become destitute. But I think it is the village that nurtures these values in the child. And by village we mean the family, grandparents, the neighbors, the communities, because that's where we learn our values as we grow. Now, all those values may not be perfect. There may be abuse that takes place in those cultures. But largely, it's the African concept of the village is where the child is formulated. It's also an Indian concept. It's also an Islamic concept. It's a Christian concept.
You are a writer of short stories, and no doubt when you were at school, V.S. Naipaul, our celebrated novelist, he was teaching at the University of Uganda. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I must say, I am now reading Naipaul after 50 years of living my home in Africa.
Hmm.
And I've been a nomad in the world. 50 years ago, I was in Kenya. Uh, 60 years ago, I was in South Africa. 65 years ago, I came to Kenya. 50 years, or little over 50 years ago, Asians left East Africa and they went into the diaspora, a second diaspora. So when I now read Naipaul, after having lived in France for almost 30 years, in England for the next 14 years, 10 years in Kenya before I came to the West, 17 years in South Africa before I came to Kenya, I see that Naipaul's book speaks to me in a different way now. It speaks to me about identity, permanence, meaning, belonging, and I see how so much this was representing not ever having arrived at where you want to be, yet you want that little space that you can call home. So I find that Naipaul is a very complex individual, but with tremendous ability of language to capture the moment. I mean, he had the ability to capture the essence of Trinidadian life. But where Naipaul becomes universal or universalized is where people read him from the lens of their own struggle to find a place they can call home. So again, take Miguel Street. The characters in Miguel Street are absolutely brilliant. He's talking about people in one street. But the people in that one street are the people you find in every street, in every diasporic setting. Whether you go to Natal in South Africa, whether you go to the rubber plantations in Malaysia, whether you go to the railway sidings in Kenya, or whether you go to Botswana, or you go to Malawi, or you go to Angola, or if you come to Britain. So I think that Naipaul speaks to people at different times. And I think his books are all very interesting. I haven't read all of them, but I do intend reading more about him. Now, Naipaul also had his own difficulties. I mean, Naipaul, I think, had his own encounter with his own identity, which was basically he was born in Trinidad, but he was trying to grapple with his Indian identity in a Trinidadian setting. To what extent did it represent the India that his father and grandfather left? On the other hand, how was he able to relate to the India that became what it was when he wrote his book, which he called an area of darkness? It was a new area for him. And then Naipaul also had to deal with his own identity writing in the English language. So I think Naipaul represents in his writing a very interesting predicament of people who are in the process of movement. Now today the whole world is in the process of movement. So Naipaul has a new meaning. So I find that I'm beginning to enjoy Naipaul very much because Miguel Street now tells me, hey, Miguel Street is not only in Trinidad. Miguel Street is in Kuala Lumpur. Miguel Street is in Bombay. Miguel Street is in the back streets of Nairobi. And a friend of mine who's a novelist and who's a writer, short story writer in Kuala Lumpur, has written a short story book called Tales from the Court, in which he captured the East Indian or the South Indian or the South Asian diaspora in Malaysia. And he's writing another book of characters that he came across in his childhood, which are very much like Bogart and Hope and Wordsworth and Mr. Baku and the lady in the book who had 7 children or 8 children with 7 males. I don't need to sound in any way gender incorrect, But that basically is the story of your life in immigrant communities throughout the world.
Of course, it is a reality. You know, Dr. Mohammed, the world today is a cosmopolitan, and you believe in a society that is pluralistic. Do you think we are achieving that right here in Trinidad and Tobago, where different ethnicities can live together peacefully?
Well, one of the principal discourses today in the global world, what is one of the global discourses today? The question of belonging, the question of living in a society which has a cosmopolitan approach to living together. Now, pluralism, as we have read, if you read the story, if you read the speeches of His Highness the Aga Khan, who is probably one of the global proponents of the notion of pluralism. Pluralism is a very challenging concept. It's not easy. But the point is that we need to understand, how do we deal with diversity? Is diversity a weakness or is it a strength? How do we celebrate diversity? We should not tolerate it, we should celebrate it. But one of the challenges of pluralism is that I may not agree with you, but I have to be ready to hear you out, and you have to be ready to hear me out. Now, the challenges of pluralism is, how do we understand each other's cultures? How do we understand each other's food? How do we understand each other's lives? And how do we understand the notion of living together in a society that's made up of so many different ethnicities? Now, Trinidad has such incredible ethnicities. And I always tell people, wouldn't it be nice if we can live the way we eat? I mean, look at the pluralistic nature of your cuisine. Your culinary picture is very diverse. It has Africa in it, it has the Hispanic world in it, it has the spices of India in it, it has the rotis, it has African pumpkin and cassava. So, by nature, Trinidad is a pluralistic society. Pluralism is not something that's new in this country. It's been there for years. But I think the important thing is that, how do you mediate that process in a way that we look at the strength of pluralism? Pluralism is a very rich concept, but it's not automatically magical that it will come automatically.
What a good way to end the show. Our time is up, Dr. Mohammed. Briefly, in the last minute, tell us your thoughts. You are returning to London tomorrow, I understand. Tell us your thoughts of your visit, and will you return to Trinidad and Tobago?
Wow, I would love to. I mean, when I return to Trinidad and Tobago, I want to tell my friends overseas that, look, here is a fascinating country, interesting for many reasons, and we in Africa were very stuck with our own understanding what India was, our own understanding what Africa is, and we have multiple identities. I am an Indo-African. I do not know how many people in Africa use that phrase, but I think it is beautiful because Trinidad speaks to two parts of my identity. I was born in Africa and lived in Africa. We in South Africa gave the world two people, Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. But yet Trinidad also has a dimension of my identity which is Indian. And I'm proud of all my identities. I'm proud of being an Indian. I'm proud of Mahatma Gandhi. But I'm also proud of Nelson Mandela. I'm proud of the African freedom fighters who used Gandhi's principles to bring freedom to Africa. And I'm also fascinated to understand that one of the persons who worked in the Pan-Africanist concept in the early days was Henry Sylvester Williams. And Mahatma Gandhi wrote of Williams in 1903 because Williams left and went to Africa.
We would have to continue this talk on your next visit. Thank you for your time.
Definitely we will do that. But to answer your question, yes, I would love to come back to Trinidad.
So we welcome you. Viewers, Dr. Mohamed Keshavjee, author, mediator of family conflicts and disputes. currently residing in London from South Africa. I am Anne Duki. Thank you for watching.